We're looking forward to the sessions that we have this afternoon. It's going to be a lot of shared insights and new learnings for us. Clearly things that we're all very invested in and looking forward to. So the first session that we have is DEI in Action, a panel session showcasing implementation of DEI practices across campus. Be facilitated by Tony Scott, who will be joined by David Atterberry, Fiyyaz Karim, Patricia, Izek, and Francis Fernandez. And I'll hand it off to you, Tony.
Well, first, Happy New Year to everyone, and hope everyone had a wonderful winter break as classes begin next week. So we're going to jump into our panel discussion, DEI in Action, DEI practices across campus. First, we'll begin with some introductions and have each one of the panelists just tell us a little bit about yourself, your role here on campus, and how you've been involved in your DEI journey. And I will start with Fiyyaz.
Hi, everyone. My name is Fiyyaz Karim. I use he, him, his pronouns. I am an instructor in the integrated behavioral health and addiction counseling programs. And so I've been here about 6 years. My journey with DEI work, so I teach a multicultural counseling course. I've done a lot of work in social justice for the past 10 years, particularly in areas around microaggressions, implicit biases. I do a lot of consulting for various agencies, mental health agencies out in the Twin Cities around this work. I think in the last year and a half, 2 years, in light of current events like the pandemic and the murder of George Floyd, that work has increased significantly though too. So,
yeah. Thank you, Fiyyaz. Francis.
Hi, everyone. I'm Francis Fernandez. I am the Faculty Director for Health Services Management, and I co-authored and I teach HSM 4521, Inclusion and Equity in Healthcare. Been teaching that for a year now. This will be the third semester, and it has just been eye-opening to learn and continue to learn how far away we are from equity and inclusion. It's a phenomenal journey, and I'm glad that we're talking about this more and more every day.
Thank you, Francis. Patricia.
Thank you, Tony. Patricia Izek, I use she, her, a, yes pronouns. I am the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Consultant in Central Human Resources here at the University of Minnesota. And thank you so much for the invitation to be here with all of you on this panel and to share space with everyone else here. I teach at the course Talent Acquisition, Recruiting a Diverse Workforce for CCAPS, as well as a new one, Allyship, Creating an Inclusive Workplace. We also provided a webinar prior to that Allyship one that was extremely large registration for it, which I just think is a message to all of us that people are searching on how to do this work. And it's wonderful that we're having this panel to help highlight that. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
And David.
Hi, my name is David Atterberry. I'm an instructor and the academic coordinator in the Minnesota English Language Program. And I think MELP for some time has been focused on internationalizing the university and working on diversity in that way. But really, since the murder of George Floyd in 2020, we've been talking a lot more about racism with our students, looking at our curriculum and things that might be kind of unintentionally racist or biased just in our field and in our curriculum with the way that standard English is discussed. And then we've also been doing some work lately related to working with students with disabilities that I think relates to inclusion and trying to make our classes more inclusive for everyone.
All right, thank you, David. And we'll jump into the first question, and we'll start with Fiyyaz. What's been your approach to trying to implement DEI efforts in your work?
Well, kind of piggyback on what David was saying in terms of looking at, varying forms of ability. I think one thing as an instructor that I've been trying to be cognizant about is just the fact that, we have students that are processing, information at in different ways. absorbing that material in different ways. So I think as an instructor, trying to find various modalities for assignments. One thing that has been really helpful and students I've gotten a lot of feedback from is just having a variety of different options for assignments. So like, for example, a lot of times we'll have traditional discussion threads or forums in our class, and a lot of that is very written sort of content. Our program and our students constantly say there's a lot of writing in our program. And I think sometimes students get overwhelmed about that. And so one thing I've done specifically with discussion threads or certain assignments is giving them the option to do like a video recording instead of writing out that. So almost like a little video blog or vlog. Sometimes I'll use different modalities like Kaltura or Flipgrid to assist and help to foster that dialogue with a video. And I've found that students have responded really well to it. In the beginning, it was only maybe 1 or 2 students that would take advantage of that option. And that was a couple of years ago, but now I would say about half of the students take advantage of that, and they really enjoy that and having that opportunity to do that assignment in that format versus your traditional paper or sort of written discussion thread. So that's one thing that I've been doing more and more about, just because I've gotten a lot of positive feedback from students about it.
Thank you. Francis, same question. What has been your approach to trying to implement DEI efforts in your class or in your work?
Yeah, I think just like Fiyyaz mentioned, it's just trying to be a little bit more creative in how we present the assignments. But what I've been learning more about is how to be more open as to how we receive those assignments as well. So depending on the mode, of course, but we have to be respectful, and we have to be conscious that sometimes the order of the thinking or the writing might not be the same as what we think in English. And that's something that we need to be a little bit more open about and not be punitive about, right? So thinking about the different cultural needs also of the students is just, again, it's a learning environment for all of us. But the more open we are, the more communication and the more effective communication we have with the students and one another, if that makes sense. So the mode, like Fiyyaz mentioned, having that alternative, whether it's a video or an audio or in writing, whatever they feel more comfortable in. But as instructors, let's just be a little bit conscious about that the order might not be the same as what we're accustomed to hearing or reading. And that's okay. And that's okay. We just need to be constructive and again, open to that approach.
Yeah, thank you. Patricia, anything to add?
Yes, accessibility, definitely. But I think, especially because the courses that I teach really speak to the work of equity, diversity, and inclusion. I really don't know why students are there, especially for the course on talent acquisition. It may be that their supervisor is sending them there because that is what they need to do, but they may not be on board with the type of work that is required to do that. So for me, is that realization that I do not know and the variety of different perspectives that arrive in the classroom for me. And for me to really hone in on my listening skills so that I can meet them where they're at and find that common ground, which is so important, so that then I can move them along with me to help them understand how crucial this work is. The Pew Research has told us already, we are going to be the most diverse. We're not going to get less diverse ever again. We're only going to become more diverse as a nation. And that realization is here, it's a fact. And I think to help individuals realize that the work that I'm doing and what I'm sharing with them is really about the survival for their small companies or their supervisors, whatever it is. But for me to make it so that it's welcoming for them and it's attainable for them and that they can find something to hook onto so that then they can continue to grow in that space with me. So that's really important to me. You know, I don't want to lose anybody in the process or come so that they shut down on me. Thank you.
So how do we deal with the fear that people are seeing that this world is changing? I don't like that it's changing.
Thank you, Tony. What a great question. Yeah, and I see that sometimes in some of the students that are there, and those are the ones that have been requested to be there, not because of their own volition, that they go to their supervisor and say, I found this great course at CCAPS that I think is going to help us. It's that they're told that they have to be there. And they often are there with a little bit of resentment. And as you say, with some fear. And for me is to somehow acknowledge it. I don't call it out as fear, Tony, but I do say things as, you know, I know that there may be some resistance to this work, and I completely understand where that comes from. This has been a nation that has really put a lid on a lot of talent. And what we're trying to do is remove that and open it up so that we can all be better. And the research is there to support the work. So it's not that I'm saying that the more diverse we become, the better it's for just me. It's better for everyone. You know, to quote Wellstone, when we're all better, period. And I totally misquoted that, but I think we all remember what he said. So, and it's not only just the different perspectives, but we become more resilient. And, you know, and who doesn't need resiliency? I mean, this COVID-19 has really showed us resiliency is what's going to make us move forward. And no one knows how to be more resilient than our underserved communities. Yes. Resiliency is top for us. So yes, thank you for that question, Tony.
Thanks, Patricia. David, can you speak a little bit to the international student and coming into the United States educational environment and approaching this from that aspect of seeing it like from the eyes or aspect of an international learner?
Sure. Yeah, so I think I'll talk about this more from my role as academic coordinator, where I sort of work with other faculty, plan some professional development, work with our curriculum. And in June 2020, you know, right after the murder of George Floyd, our program was very eager to talk about issues of race with our students. So, you know, being from other countries so that they understood the protests happening here and understood some of the issues with police brutality and racism. And we often worry that our students just don't have the cultural context or the insights, or may not be aware that racism exists to the extent that it does in the US. So we talked about that in the summer of 2020 at our faculty orientation, you know, mid-June 2020. And we made some plans that summer for using texts in our classes that helped explore issues of racism. One was a young adult novel, deals with police brutality. The other was Born a Crime by Trevor Noah. Students discussed that, but I think what we learned from that summer is that we maybe didn't build in enough time for sort of carefully scaffolding that and providing all the context that international students need to understand those issues. And then the pandemic at the same time was also a challenge, in that so often our attention was being turned to like how to teach online or how to teach hybrid. And in the fall, we kind of lost that thread. But I think since last spring, what we've learned is that, you know, to talk about these issues with international students, it really requires some careful planning and sort of more time. So last spring, we started by getting input from faculty about like what themes related to the DE&I that they think we should explore. A lot of those did relate to, like, you know, things to explore with our students. And then this last fall at our faculty orientation, we did kind of a jigsaw where people read different articles on the topic that we found. You know, one was about decentering whiteness in English language education. So kind of moving away from treating sort of the white native speaker as the ideal teacher and as sort of the ideal model. Also looking at another article on multilingualism with kind of the same idea of, you know, turning multilingual students into native speakers isn't really our goal. You know, we're saying that they're assets of being multilingual, and that, you know, international students bring diversity to our campus. So we're not just trying to turn them into white native speakers, which is often kind of the default of how textbooks and even learning outcomes can be written, is that that's the goal, when we know that that's really not the goal that we want. So we talked about that. And then we also talked about a third article that was called Black Lives Matter in TESOL, actually by one of our former faculty members. It was directly about how to build course materials around issues of racism, around reading and providing all the context needed. And that we continue talking about in a couple workshops in the fall, and are continuing to work on this semester. And we've been trying to set up sort of follow through so that people set goals, but then we talk about them at multiple points again in the future to follow up and kind of see what progress has been made. And I think since we've been allowing ourselves more time, things have been going better to sort of develop over time our interests and goals.
Yeah, I think you mentioned something important at the end, allowing yourself time. That this didn't happen overnight. This has been years building up, and so it's going to take some time for us to get there.
Definitely, yeah. I think seeing this as something that's happening over years is definitely helpful. Even though our heart was in the right place at the beginning, we just didn't take enough time to realize how much space we needed to make in the curriculum for it.
Francis, what changes or improvements are you making in response to your growing understanding?
Wow. Like I've mentioned before, this is just a continuous learning journey. For me as an instructor, for me as a professional, and as a person. And I think we all need to be intentional as to accepting change and accepting the learning that comes with it. In the classroom, I've been intentional about diversifying the groups, right? When we have a group assignment, you see them kind of like gravitate to their own little cliques, or, even let's just call it out, the racial or ethnic backgrounds, right? And I've been intentional in saying, okay, everybody stand up, we're going to mix things up. And it has been really, really educational and fantastic to see the outcomes of those group assignments, because now they're thinking in different ways, not just the one way that they know, but they're learning to listen to their fellow colleague and learn from their needs as well when they're presenting a project or a group assignment. So that has been really great. As a person, and I think we all need to just own up to the fact that we need to learn more. We need to be more open, and we need to address fear in ourselves as well. I think it's not just a fear in the students, but we also have the fear of, am I doing the right thing? Am I saying the right thing? And we live in a world where you have to think twice before you speak, right? Just because you don't know if that might be misinterpreted. And I think it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to say, I need to learn, help me understand. And to me, the key is empathy. I think in any of the courses that we teach or any of the industries that we work at, we need to approach DE&I with empathy. And I think that's the way that we can learn and move forward.
And sort of follow up, and Patricia, you hit on this. Why should they care?
Why should we care? Right? I think we should all care, because as Patricia mentioned, we're going to continue to diversify. I think that's the only way that as human beings we can grow and we can evolve. There's a lot of pain, regardless of the racial background or ethnic background that the minority belongs to. There is pain involved with where we're at right now. There's pain that we don't understand from our fellow minority member as well, and I speak as a minority. I can't understand some of the pains that my fellow minority members have, but I can empathize with them and I can help them understand mine so that we can help each other grow and lift each other up. And we all need to do that. I mean, that's the only way we can evolve and keep growing.
Patricia. So the same question. I know you've been in this work for a while. So what changes are you making?
Oh my goodness. I think one thing I try to highlight is the one certain thing is that besides the fact that we are diversifying and faster, right? That exponential growth is beginning to catch up with us, is the fact that we have always changed. Mm-hmm. You can look at any field, any discipline. It is constantly evolving, and change is part of growth. And it is important for us to really embrace that. And what's in it for me? Well, if you stay you're going to miss this opportunity for growth. And we will always learn from going along with trying to learn something different. If nothing else, we'll say it's not for me, but it's trying to bring them along, which is the most challenging for me, especially when I see that resistance or that fear. So, I mean, it's easy for me to bring you along, Tony. I mean, you know, it's like, oh, Tony, you didn't have to be here, right? Because in fact, you have to help me bring others along. But it's those others that I know that are skeptical and afraid of what this change is going to mean, not only for themselves, but more, the fear I see more is for their children, because they realize that as we embrace these new thoughts of diversifying and how wonderful this could be, somehow along the way, there's been a binary that it means less for someone. And it's, you know, and that's something that I speak to often, because it's not about it becoming less, it's about more opportunity. And it's a more equitable opportunity for more. So I think what we have had to settle for is a lot of not really the best. And we have been told that it's been the best, but really what we have been given is middle of the road. And I think by really opening up possibilities and true opportunities for everyone, we are really going to get the best. And it's not going to happen today, I guarantee that. And it's not going to happen tomorrow, and I guarantee that as well. And it probably will not happen where I will see the true benefits of this work. But people who are really committed to this work get that. And we know that what we're doing is that we're continuing to plant seeds and to harvest this work, and that the true benefits will be those coming after us. So, and that's what motivates me tremendously. So yes, I think that's how I've realized, and that has been, you know, when you first get into this work, you want to see change now. And that's what really, as I've gotten older, I'm not sure about wiser, but definitely older, it's a realization that we need to just build more capacity for this work, and to realize that the benefits will come. And that's what keeps me going.
Thank you. Fiyyaz, welcome back. I see you had dropped off for a minute. What have been some of the success or challenges you've encountered in your journey?
Let's see here. Well, challenges, I think, you know, I talked about trying to implement different, you know, new teaching modalities, finding ways to get students engaged. And I think, as, you know, Patricia said, you know, this change doesn't happen overnight. And I think just, you know, being comfortable with that as well, though, too. And I think for me, like, for example, like the, you know, the utilization of videos as an option for students for discussion threads. And, you know, I think very early on, I got a little discouraged because not that many students were kind of taking advantage of that option. But I think just kind of trusting the process, and now, you know, kind of doing it a couple of semesters in, a lot more students are invested in that, though, too. So I think it just takes time. And then you're constantly reevaluating and tweaking those things accordingly, though, too. So I think that's been a challenge, and something just being comfortable with the discomfort with some of these things, though, too.
Yeah, thank you. David, same question. What have been some success or challenges you've encountered in your journey to making change?
Well, I mentioned one of the main challenges before has been the pandemic, and also addressing online learning at the same time. But I do feel like hopefully we're kind of, at least the online learning is becoming more familiar, and we're able to turn more attention to DE&I. For successes, I do think that what we've been doing with kind of continued discussions and really trying to review things from previous meetings and help people like recall what we talked about at the last meeting before we get into talking about new things has been good. I do think, you know, before in the past, sometimes, you know, they would be so isolated, and it's like people would forget all about all the good things that came out of other workshops. So I think moving to that model has been a success. I also think we've had some success lately around inclusion of students with disabilities. So we just happened to have had a few blind or low vision students recently at the same time as the pandemic. And we've really been working closely with the DRC and ironing out some of our communication processes. We formed a working group with another faculty member and I and a few of the DRC staff in the fall, created a very detailed checklist. MALP kind of, because of the large number of contact hours we have and because our classes are very dynamic and sort of changing to meet students' needs, it can be challenging to work with students who have some accommodations. But I think by like working so closely with the DRC, we're starting to get some of those things figured out and that it should go better in the future. And my hope is that we can be known as an English program where students with disabilities can succeed and want to come because we do, include them. So yeah, I would say that, and a lot of the other stuff I think is still in progress. Some of the goals of making our curriculum less focused on sort of standard American English as the model, that's still in progress, and the work people are doing with addressing racism and anti-racism with their students, that's kind of in progress still.
Patricia, again, because you've been in this work for a while, how do you feed yourself? What do you pour into yourself to keep you healthy? Because you mentioned hope. So what provides that hope for you?
I think one thing that really helps me is that I'm a natural optimist. And so I think that's a really, really helps in this work. It just, I really, I'm very thankful for that. And that's just my personality. But is to keep on top of what I can lean on, right? I was never more happy to see Impact 2025 from the president in commitment number 4 when she said community and belonging. Whoa, I said, I'm going to lean into that one really heavily. The president is aligning with me, and so I will align with the president. And so I mentioned that as often as I can. We are aligning with the president with her goals, and this is really important. And also, I need to keep current, right? Because there's constantly new material out there, new research. And we are in higher ed and folks want research, right? And there's research there that says that implicit bias training doesn't work. And of course there is. And I say, yes, absolutely. And if we were to say to everyone that we're going to teach you how to drive and you're going to take this one course and you're going to sit there for 3 hours and we're going to provide you with some videos and with some good reading material, and then we're going to give you a driver's license and there you go, we would all be aghast, right? Because that would be ridiculous. We need to practice, we need to be behind a wheel or some sort of simulator, and we need to begin to focus on how to look at our at those obstructions that we all have and how to become better drivers. And that's exactly, that's what we need to do. That's of course, it's the beginning of what hopefully you will embrace as something that will change you and you will begin to then bring to all aspects of your life. So, and I need that type of research in order to back me up, especially doing this work in higher ed. So very important for me. And then also to make sure that I need to sometimes step away. I sometimes just need to step away for a little bit, and I love being outside. So I'm glad that we're done with the frigid temperature for a little bit. So just even if it's just a walk around, just a little bit, but I think that really is to just get up and go outside for some fresh air and try and get that new, different perspective, right? Because I hit brick walls. And I think we all do. And it's just to recognize them and say it's a brick wall, but brick walls don't go forever. There isn't a single brick wall that goes forever. So it's just finding that end of it or whatever, the gap or whatever it is, just realizing that and reminding myself, yeah, it's a solid brick wall, but it's not forever. So we'll get around it somehow. We'll get through it. We'll go over it. We'll figure it out.
Thank you. I haven't thought about the brick wall, but that's a good one. I'm going to keep that in the back. I'm going to keep that in the toolbox. Francis, same question. How do you feed yourself?
First of all, I love the analogy you brought, Patricia, with driving, and it's a skill, right, that we have to continuously adapt to and continue to learn. Like when I first moved to Minnesota from Miami, yeah, I'm that crazy lady that moved from Miami, Florida. I had to learn how to drive in the snow. Like I've been driving my whole life, but I didn't know how to drive in the snow. So it's just, again, adapting and evolving and continuing to learn and being open to learn. So how I feed myself is seeing the hope and the dreams that my students have in changing the world, changing healthcare in particular, because that's where we work at, right? But just changing so that they and their children don't have to go through what their parents went through. Feeding that's just like, it's just amazing to receive that education myself from them and be able to see in my own children's eyes that they're not going to stand for this. The stuff that we've been going through, these kids are not going to stand for it. And I'm excited for that because they're brave and they have the courage, and it's the right time for them to step up. Things that perhaps I went through in my youth or my earlier, career years of discrimination, of, unfair treatment. I said, wow, if that happened to me today, I could open my mouth and get somewhere, and as sad as it is that a lot of us had to go through some of those things, it's still a learning experience that we're hoping that our children and our children's children don't have to deal with and can continue to evolve and grow. So that hope feeds me.
Thank you. David, how are you feeding yourself? I know you mentioned some things you're doing in the office, but how else?
So, I mean, one thing that's been important for me is to keep learning about these issues. I've joined a book circle led by writing studies on anti-racism and writing assessment, which has been really helpful. I mean, some of the ideas are revolutionary, like moving away from proficiency-based grades, which for a lot of us instructors would be a huge change, but still talking about those issues with other faculty has been good. Doing training on accessibility. Outside of work, it's been important for me in the last couple of years to really focus on taking care of myself too, just with the strains of being a parent of young kids during the pandemic. And both my kids are home in quarantine today. It's like just trying to take care of myself and making sure that both, mentally and physically, I'm well enough to continue working on these things.
Fiyyaz, how do you feed yourself?
I think just to echo, it's sort of a theme that I've been hearing from the other speakers, but just the importance of immersing yourself in this area and keeping up to date with the relevant research and content. And I think that's the great thing about there's so many resources available to us. I'm constantly doing trainings through, the CEI and other institutions here on campus, outside of campus, staying up to date with the relevant research because it's constantly evolving and changing. And not only just the research, but just being up to date with current events though too. I think that's one thing, especially teaching a class like multicultural counseling, where it's not only being up to date with the latest research around DEI, but it's also just knowing what's going on in the world though too, because those are things that students want to talk about. They want to process those current events. And, especially training future mental health clinicians, I think it's important to recognize how those current events, whether they're local, regional, global, international sorts of events, how those are going to impact the populations that they serve and they work with in the future though too. And I think another important piece is also, when to distance. I think Patricia, you said that when to distance yourself away from this though too, because I think as we constantly talk about in the mental health field, the importance of mitigating compassion fatigue and learning to continue to take care of ourselves and engaging in proper self-care. So I think that's another good piece though too, is finding a balance. How do we immerse ourselves in this content, but also finding ways to find a balance and taking some time for ourselves though too, because it's very heavy content. It's very, these are hard conversations to have, but it's also, I think, really rewarding, to be in this area and to immerse yourself in this field though too.
Yeah, yep, I agree. Francis, what's one key or one piece of advice you would give someone who's just sort of starting out and they don't know where to begin? So what's one piece of advice you would give them?
Where to begin? I think the one piece of advice would be to listen and be open and not be afraid of going out there and seeking resources, and it doesn't need to be all, professional. It can also be in your house of worship even, or, family members or friends. There are a lot of houses of worship that have really embraced, the systemic racism issues that we have in our community, especially after George Floyd, of course. But I would say listen and not be afraid. And like I mentioned before, we're going to make mistakes. It's okay to make mistakes as long as we learn from them, as long as we're open to embrace the challenges and embrace the need for evolving.
David, same question. One piece of advice you would give?
It might be the same piece of advice to listen, because I know that the DE&I initiatives we've done in MELP have worked the best when sort of the ideas have come from the faculty and staff rather than ideas from the top down. So when we really sought a bunch of ideas and then worked with people to narrow them down and find areas of interests and themes people wanted to focus on, that's just felt like better ideas for one thing. And then also like there's more buy-in and people are more engaged with it too.
Thank you. Patricia, a piece of advice you would give?
Definitely what has been said. What I would add is to be brave and to listen to the other side, to somehow find somewhere, somehow to become better versed as to why people think differently. And I know that it's really easy to say, well, it's so wrong or whatever, but it's really important, because unless you understand where others come from, we can't help them come to your way of thinking or even be able to get them to listen. So I think that's really important as well. So definitely to listen, but to have the courage to, even though it's really hard sometimes, but to listen to someone that and try to find where does that come from, right? What's at the root of that, and to then figure out a way to engage at that level. So very important.
Fiyyaz, you have anything to add as well to what piece of advice you would give?
No, I mean, I think aside from the active listening piece, just coming at this content with a sense of humility though too, not being afraid to step out of, and I constantly will tell this to my students too, don't be afraid to step out of your comfort zone and take risks and have these conversations though too, because I think that's a very big piece, is these conversations tend to still be very taboo and uncomfortable. And so I think always, looking for opportunities, finding ways to intervene, taking risks, speaking out, finding, a voice and a way to have these conversations with others though too.
Thank you. Are there any voices or perspectives that is missing from these conversations in the DEI work we're doing? Patricia.
I think it's really important to bring in as many perspectives as you can, and as early as possible. There often things get done and then we say, oh, we want your input. And the reality is, no, you don't want input at this point. Input is when you're framing it. Now you just want feedback. I mean, you've already decided. So I think, people want to be included. They want to be included when there's still the possibility of your perspective being heard. It doesn't always have to be implemented, but everybody wants to be heard. It goes to being valued, being seen, right? And so, if you have the opportunity to include those voices early on, you're changing the curriculum. Ask some of your former students what worked, what didn't work, and then even then make sure that it's a group of students that represent different perspectives. If you take it to your colleagues, again, the same thing. It's what when I I'm doing my course, and those search committees, right? Those search committees have to change the way and who sits on those search committees. Otherwise, we will continue to get sameness. I mean, it's no surprise that we have and that we are where we are. So those are the type of things that we really have to be cognizant of, that if we want something different, then we must do something different. We can't keep doing the same thing and all of a sudden expect a different outcome. So I think that's something really important.
Thank you. Fiyyaz, same question. Are there voices or perspectives that we're not hearing enough from as we're doing the DEI work on campus?
I think the bigger thing I've heard kind of at a larger university level is, with thinking about different levels of ability and especially invisible disabilities, with mental illness. And I know that's been a huge push from, the larger institution. I sit on the mental health initiatives and mental health advocate committees at the university as well. And I think that's one thing I've heard from students, though, in our programs too, is just, finding ways that we can support them as best as possible. Just going up, aside from just the accommodations aspect, I think just, them feeling supported just across the board, though, too. So I think that's one area that I know both here in CCAPS, but also at a larger institution is something that's being looked at more in depth.
And no, there has been more and more talk about mental health and issues surrounding that. Why has there been such a hard thing for us to talk about as a culture, as people, to say when we're hurting and we need help? Fiyyaz, I want you to continue with that a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So I think obviously with mental health, there's always been stigma around mental health concerns and psychosocial concerns, and especially when we look at this cross-culturally, though, too. We know many cultures, there's not even sort of a word to describe different mental health concerns. Various cultures, a lot of times mental health is looked at from a very somatic, with more bodily concerns, versus mental health. And I think more so in light of the pandemic, it's been even, an area where people don't want to talk about it because they don't want to burden others. Because I think the thought is, well, you know what, everyone's going through this pandemic, so I'm feeling anxious or I'm feeling depressed, but I don't want to burden other people because they're probably, dealing with all this stuff too with the pandemic. And so I think there's this kind of conspiracy of silence, especially when we look at mental health, and especially in the midst of a significant loss, and conceptualizing the pandemic as a very significant disenfranchised loss. That has also, I think, left students feeling very isolated and not wanting to talk about their concerns.
Anyone else want to address the mental health aspect as well?
Yeah, I echo what Fiyyaz was mentioning. Also, mental health has just such a big stigma still to this day. And when you throw in the multicultural diversity, intergenerational, intersex, intergender, there's a lot going on. And we need to just really be open about everything and be able to hear them. And that's the point of inclusivity. Have them at that table so that they can help us and help each other, move forward. It's not enough to, just read a book or do a TED Talk or whatnot and then move forward. These folks, we all need to be at that table, and we need to be welcoming and inviting so that it can be genuine.
I can, and this, I don't think there's any research on this yet, but when you ask why all of a sudden, I think it was a perfect storm. It was the pandemic and the murder of George Floyd. I mean, I think the human psyche only has capacity for so much. It's not to say that, that we can't reach incredible heights, but I think we have limits. And I think what we all witnessed just put us over I think it did. And I think, and it was just something that we just, for many, just incapable of being able to move forward. And then coupled with the pandemic that left us isolated for many, alone, and having to deal with small children when we, in instances where we weren't dealing with them, right? They went to school and we had our adult life. And then all of a sudden, here we are with this looming awareness now of the inequities, the social inequities that have been with us for 400 years in this nation. Let's not even go to the international level and how they've been dealing with them for their own, but here, and I think that just, you know, it was a boiling, and it's just all of a sudden people have realized, I can't do this alone, I need help. And then, so I think that has risen. I don't know, but I know that I have seen this.
And Patricia, I was going to say there is some newer research looking at, in the last year, there's been some newer studies published, both with the impact of the pandemic on mental health, but also community traumas like the murder of George Floyd, and how I would agree, I think it's a perfect storm of the two combined, you know, grief, loss, and trauma embedded with both of these events that has really taken a toll on people.
And the research by Resma Mankin, you know, My Grandmother's Hand, and how this trauma, it stays with you. So this is something that I think we need to all be cognizant of. I think our African-American community has known this, other communities have known this, but it's really important for us to realize that's trauma that this nation has suffered as a whole.
Thank you. And we have about 10 minutes left. And so I'm going to open it up for any questions that anyone has. If anyone wants to share what they're doing in their space around DEI that they feel is important and that they can pass on information to others to help them. So you can either put it in the chat, or if you want, you can come off mic and ask your questions or share your comment if you like.
While folks are thinking of their comments or questions, I just wanted to say there's a great article in the Brief this past week about our wonderful moderators. So I encourage everyone to take a peek at that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tony, for all the work you've done. So appreciate it.
Well, I have a question. Patricia, you were just talking about how now we're all going to be carrying this trauma with us that we've been experiencing, and we're going to carry it into the future. And I'm just wondering if anyone on the panel has an idea of what we can do to deal with this trauma, to process it, to try to heal it. You know, and it may be kind of soon to know exactly what that would be, but I would love to, I really want to keep following up on this idea. And I just wonder if you have any thoughts about that.
I leave that to my mental health experts, but I just know that this is something that will be with us. And I hope that our professionals are already on, I'm sure they are. I'm sure they are. This is going to be something.
Yeah, what kind of comes to my mind, Joan, also is that we don't have to carry this alone. That's kind of what comes to mind, that there are others who are here to support us and to encourage, and to, when we need that, like I said, that ear to listen to, they're here to listen. The person that here to give us that hug when we need that hug, or that pat on the back, or to hold that hand when we need it, that shoulder to cry on. And so just realize that we don't have to do this alone.
Mm-hmm. Wow, what a good point. Yeah, we do it together. We do it not by isolating, but we do it by being together.
I do see a question in here from AJ. How do we feed our spirits?
That was me just saying, thank you, Tony, for asking that question.
Okay.
I think it's such a good reminder. I think it's easy to forget to recharge our own batteries, and it's so important. And I think especially if you're attracted to this kind of work, you might have, and here's me projecting a slight overshare of empathy. And I think when you have that, it's even harder to remember to do that important work. So I appreciated it. Every one of you said something that I'm taking away with me. So thank you, everybody.
Yeah. I do see one from Leanne. You see, I keep thinking that all this does to the kids in school right now. How are they seeing all this, and what will effects of this lived experience? What will social justice, equity, trauma mean to them, and how will it impact them? I'll share this. I was on a phone call last night with my son's vice principal, and he was speaking of the number of fights he has to break up every day in school. And he said they're fighting over, well, that was my granola bar. He said, I got an office full of them. Or, well, he took my mask. There's a whole table. And so it is acting out amongst our youth, and they don't know how to voice or to speak to the trauma. And the way to do it is either acting out, fighting, aggression, silence. So yeah, it's we're in a tough time right now, and we're all concerned about our kids. I see, Ben, what's something you have personally had to let go of as an assumption or a thing you thought you knew in the past few years of doing DEI work? Ooh, that's a good question. Thanks, Ben. Panelists, anyone want to take that? Something you've had to let go, or an assumption you've had?
I'll speak to that.
Okay.
In the past, I used to believe that all lives mattered. And that was what I thought. I'm Puerto Rican, and, yes, there's racism everywhere, but I just thought all lives mattered. I participated in conversations on race from my church. And it was a couple of years ago, and that really started to open up my perspective. We're not all professionals. We're not experts in DEI. We are learning, right? And that's when, the historical trauma came into play, and I understood. My eyes were opened and said, that's the aha moment, that no, every life matters, but we all have a trauma that's attached to our race or our ethnicity, and we need to understand what that is in order to break the stigmas, break the taboos, learn, and, as cliche as this might sound, love each other. We need to learn to love each other. And I like what Tony mentioned sometimes, is that hug that we need, and it's a fact of we are human beings. We are programmed to be able to love. We're programmed to be able to suffer. And we need to understand that suffering before we can have the hope and the love. And that's what I've taken away from the last couple of years of doing this work.
Thank you, Francis.
And to add one here, this goes back more than just a few years, maybe 5 or 10 years, but I know when I started teaching in MELP, I and most instructors had English only policies in our classes, because, we're thinking, no, this is a place to practice, you're immersing yourself in English, but now it kind of makes me cringe, what that says to a student, that we don't value your first language or languages at all, it doesn't belong here. And I mean, pedagogically now, the focus is more on like leveraging all of the languages that somebody has at their disposal, and they're all interconnected and useful in the classroom. And I think virtually nobody, I don't think anybody has an English only policy anymore. And yeah, just a lot more focus on multilingualism as an asset and stuff.
Right. Thanks, David. Now, so Leanne, I saw you. Oh, go ahead, Patricia.
Do I quickly add? I just said the realization that we don't have to wait for leadership to join us. Okay. And it's sometimes we just have to say, that's okay, they'll get there, and or whatever, but we can do this. If it's not coming from my leader right now, I have an incredible leader, but when it's not, then I could reach out to Tony, right? Or I could reach out to Fiyyaz and say, hey, do you want to get together? I have an idea. Let's just, do a chat, and then say, who else should we invite? And so I just want to encourage all of you that if you have an idea and it's not coming from the top, then go this way, go horizontally. And when the push gets big enough, it will reach the top. It bubbles to the top. You know, we have to stop the trickle down. Sometimes we just have to bubble up.
Thank you. Well, we are at time. I want to thank our panelists, David Atterberry, Francis Fernandez, Patricia Izek, Fiyyaz, Karim. Thank you for all that you're doing, first for the University of Minnesota, for taking time out to share your experience and the work you're doing at DEI. Feel free to reach out to anyone on the panel, those who are listening. If you have, like Patricia said, you want to just send a quick chat, you have questions, we're definitely here to support the work we're doing at the university around DEI and supporting our students, and then also supporting one another. So thank you and enjoy your rest of the development day.